G'day and welcome back to Critical AFL on YouTube for tonight's review of West Coast versus Swan Districts, where the WAFL Eagles went down fighting in a game where some much needed reinforcements have arrived, just on the back of a recent patch of injuries. For tonight's episode of WAFL Watch, I'll be starting with a health check review of our current list status, just after a lot of movement in the available list over the last couple of weeks. Who our best performers were from the WAFL side for West Coast, including some new inclusions from the mid-season draft, my key takeaways from the match, and then finally my predictions for who's pushing for a spot in the AFL side next weekend. So to begin this review, I probably need to rewind a little bit and recap my concerns from last weekend's AFL and WAFL reviews. The concern was that for the first time this year, it felt like the club in its entirety, West Coast, we're just beginning to flirt with the beginning of another injury crisis. Fortunately, in the last week since, we've actually had a bit of luck bringing players back from injury into the squad through mid-season draft, as well as dodging a couple of bullets with potential injuries from last weekend, just not really eventuating. So I'll put them together in a little bit of a dot point summary for those numbers. Number one, I mentioned at the end of my AFL review last weekend that Tom Cole and Tyrell Dewar could have done ankle injuries. They both went down really late in the dying minutes against Adelaide with quite strong reactions to rolled ankles, but neither of those made their way into the Tuesday injury update, and they will be playing tomorrow against Geelong unless there's a late last-minute emergency. Number two, we also managed to pick up two promising new prospects from the mid-season draft during the week. Although there's no sign of Jacob Newton today in the WAFL, just by the way, he didn't play, or there was no mention either. Our number one pick, Tom McCarthy, played and was arguably our best player. Also, number three, Campbell Chesser returned from injury, and despite another extended stint on the sidelines, he was arguably our best player. And then number four, with the AFL match at home this weekend, all three emergencies for the AFL squad did play on the WAFL side today, which did help. So all in all, we ended up playing with 13 AFL listed players on the park today, which is actually the same number as last week. But the bigger difference was actually that the squad balance was a little bit better, just with the right number of midfielders lining up. They brought Clay Hall and Tom Gross back into the WAFL Eagles. And I know that people might mention Hall didn't play in the AFL last week, but he was actually the travelling emergency. So he was stuck in limbo. I think I actually mentioned that at the time, that neither club got his expertise, neither of the two squads. But then five, lastly, if we can get through, this is part of the health check, if we can get through this round with no injuries, both from the WAFL, which there were none today that I saw, and the AFL tomorrow, we should also expect Jack Petrocelli back from injury. He was a test this week, but he obviously didn't get up. Bailey Williams, who was managed this weekend, so he was taken out of the AFL side, mentioned that he was managed. He didn't play in the WAFL either, so they really were just giving him a full week off. Jacob Newton, as I mentioned from the mid-season draft, I'm assuming that he probably didn't get across to WA in time. It's a lot probably to pack up your whole life and move over here. So I'd expect that next weekend he'll be here too. And then potentially Cal Jamison as a test, returning from a minor hamstring. I think he came up in the injury report on Tuesday as 1 to 2 weeks. So usually you find that after that first week, they're considered a test, unless there's a setback that's really obvious. The overall summary, though, is that after a really worrying run of injuries, some much needed reinforcements did arrive today, and there's even more still on the way. So that was just a little bit of a health check for the list to kick us off, which I know is a little bit different as an opening feature in these reviews, but I figured that a lot of the interest in these WAFL review videos is about our list depth, so hopefully everyone found that to be useful information. By all means, let me know in the comments. But that does bring me to our best players. And at the top of the list, I had Tom McCarthy and Campbell Chesser, neck and neck, probably alongside Clay Hall as well. But in the spirit of the occasion, I'm going to put our number one mid-season draft pick, Tom McCarthy, first in order. So McCarthy was played off halfback today, pretty exclusively, just the same as he was being played in the Richmond VFL side all year. That was one of the things that was mentioned in his profile, despite him having a reputation as a midfielder prior to this year. His running carry was excellent, and what stands out to me watching McCarthy is how good his awareness is with the ball in his hands. He showed a real knack for knowing exactly which opponent he could step around, what gaps he could break through. And it didn't really come across as any display of like raw athleticism like you'd expect from, say, your Chad Warner types, and even to a certain degree the Harley Reid style. But it was more someone with the ability just to gauge exactly how fast his opponents are going to be in a tight spot very quickly. He's quick, but a lot of it was really clever decision making and composure. He finished with 26 disposals, and it's probably worth acknowledging that some of those were from taking kickouts, but there's absolutely no playing down how effective he was with the ball in hand on every single occasion. I couldn't tell you how long it might take him to, let's say, acclimatise to the West Coast game plan, but aside from that one detail that I really don't know much about, I've got to say this: do not be surprised if you see him in the AFL squad sooner rather than later. And also, while I'm trying to paint a picture of the McCarthy profile, because he's very new to us, I think I need to acknowledge something. Last week in the mid-season draft video that I made, I mentioned that he appeared to be a really no-frills type of player, just based on some online footage I found of, I think it was every one of his possessions in the VFL game. But having properly seen him play now in the WAFL Eagles, I have to retract that observation. There are frills. And I mean that as in there's some real dynamic football being played by the guy. He's not just, run-of-the-mill possession count. He was basically twisting and turning every time he got the ball in his hands. And often that was in the middle of packs in the contest. I also know that I said we've done well picking up in the last couple of mid-season drafts some really good players who have found their way into our best 23. I was talking about Jack Hutchinson and Ryan Barrick. But I'm going to go out on a limb and say it now. Tom McCarthy looks like he is going to be an absolute gun, and we look like we might have picked up somebody who will be elite. So he could very well be right on the end of that spectrum. But that pretty much covers my little review for Tom McCarthy. The main point is be very excited with our pickup. He's well and truly exceeded expectations. Which brings me to Campbell Chesser. Like I said, I pretty much had Campbell Chesser equal first in our best players today. And it was really after another massively prolonged stint on the sidelines with injury that Chesser walked his way straight back into the side with an absolute heap of possessions, especially early. He finished with 22, but most of all, he actually showed a ton of composure all day, which is really encouraging for me, since my observation of Chesser since he was drafted has been that I think probably from a psychological point of view, he's kind of struggled with composure despite the really obvious talent that he's got and the really obvious amount of hard work that he puts in. And that's kind of one of those things that when you flick that switch, you'd expect everything else to come together, which it did today. So I honestly really wasn't expecting Chesser to walk in and find himself at the top of the pack of most impactful players today. I don't think anyone would, but he just was. He had a ton of possession, like I mentioned. He beat guys consistently in contested one-on-ones. He ran the ball with a gear of athleticism that I don't think many guys at WAFL level can match. And his disposal was also really effective. So, yeah, I'm absolutely stoked to be sitting here saying that he did it all, as I've really wanted to see Chesser succeed ever since he was drafted. He was our first, top midfielder pick in years. That was about 4 years ago. And then from there, I think he's really struggled with his injuries and then continuity being out on the paddock. So after that and all this time, I'm probably the most confident that I've been in him finding a place in our long-term future. That's a big call after one round, but probably says more that he did play that well in his first game back from such a long layoff. But that's enough for number 2 player on the bests. And number 3, as always, I've got Clay Hall in my bests. He finished with 29 disposals and 2 goals. And despite being consistently overlooked in the AFL side, he's actually finding himself into my known quantity list of players, at least at the WAFL level. He consistently racks up big numbers, wins a lot of contested possession, and he manages decent clearance numbers every week too. So he really is becoming a bit of a known quantity to discuss, other than to say that he's still putting his hand up. I don't think a week goes by where he isn't really pressing his case to step into the role of the AFL midfielder. And at this stage, it's really just a matter of time, in my opinion. Other strong performances came from Brett Bazzo, Tom Gross, Cohen Livingston once again. And I think it's important to mention that out of the WAFL listed players, again, Harley Sparks was in our top players, which is pretty common for him. And Shannon Lucassen performed really well in a bit of a utility role, which is really quite admirable for a guy who normally plays as a key forward for West Coast. But he's basically moved around the ground to accommodate the AFL players that are coming in and out of the WAFL side. So Last weekend it came to my attention that the WAFL Eagles captain, Jack Eastoff, is a follower of the channel and appreciates these reviews. And it really made me think that moving forward, I do want to make a point of acknowledging the WAFL listed guys who are having an impact, just because it often does fall to them to shoulder a pretty heavy burden, just lifting week in, week out, all the really heavy groundwork, no matter what our injury list looks like. So thanks, Jack. You guys are doing a great job, and I hope you keep an eye out for these reviews every week for the WAFL guys in your team to hear about. And that's it for my player reviews, which brings me to my key takeaways. Number one, my first key takeaway from the match today is probably the most positive observation so far this year from the WAFL. And that is that the WAFL Eagles look like they're really now fluent in the AFL game plan that we've adopted this year, the Andrew McWalter style. I think for us to have reached this point, it takes a mixture of a lot of continuity in the WAFL side, which we've had this year, as well as employing the right amount of resources at the club, off the field, which I did hear a lot about over the off-season, all the restructuring, John Worsfold coming in to oversee all the sides, AFL, WAFL and AFLW. And I couldn't actually tell you if the West Coast Eagles Football Club is currently paying the AFL levy for being above the soft cap, but it wouldn't surprise me if we are. And I know that I've had some discussion in the comments with people over the last few weeks about this, so I might put a little bit of detail into it, because if we are over that soft cap, then I have to say it's worth the investment. So for anybody unfamiliar with that, what I'm talking about is the soft cap system. And I'll try and give you a really quick crash course. Essentially, the AFL has a total cap on payments for all the staff. And it's very similar to the players' salary cap, but it's just got a couple of different mechanisms that are available, unlike the salary cap for the AFL players. For instance, probably the most important one is any club that exceeds the soft cap, when they do, they have to pay the AFL like a luxury tax on every dollar that they exceed that cap by. And that tax rate doubles if you spend more than 1 year above the cap. So just giving you an example, if you're $1 million over the cap, extreme number, then you're going to pay like 37 cents in the dollar also to the AFL for every single dollar of that million. But the second year, it's like 75% in the dollar. So it's really designed to say, if you slip over, get yourself back down. Otherwise, you're going to end up funding half the AFL. So while financially it may not seem like a responsible thing to do, for a really wealthy club like West Coast, who have struggled on the field ever since that cap was reduced during COVID, I would see it as a worthwhile investment for us if that's what it takes for us to really get ourselves back on track. Like I said, though, I'm not actually sure if we are above the soft cap, but either way, what I'm going back to my initial point, what I'm seeing in the WAFL this season is that we probably have the best environment for development in the WAFL squad since we actually joined the WAFL. The WAFL side, like I said, is playing the same brand of footy as the AFL side's been playing, and I'm sure that a lot of work would have gone into that. So just a little tip of the hat to whoever's been involved in that process, and to all the, I suppose, subscribers and fans out there. There's some very promising signs for us long-term because of it. Number two, my other key takeaway is quite simple, and that is the depth is really weighting the WAFL at a little bit more strength and quality than it has been over the last few years. It's not a stretch to say that right now West Coast is currently missing our three best players in Jeremy McGovern, Elliot Yeo, and now Jake Waterman. Basically, that's our best player across every line, but unlike other years, we're actually still seeing the depth of AFL talent step into the roles that these guys play across every line and do well. And even still, there are guys waiting in the WAFL that could also play those roles if we were to further fall back. So we've had some injury crisis issues over the last few years, but the depth of the entire list is a lot stronger than it has been for a while, which is another big positive. And speaking of WAFL players waiting for the call up, that does bring me to my final section, which is predictions for the AFL side next week. As always, I like to list these predictions in order from most likely first. And at the top of this list is our shiny, brand new mid-season draftee, Tom McCarthy. McCarthy has AFL speed, composure, and class with the ball in hand, ending the day with a really impressive 26 disposals, like I mentioned. And that's just two days after flying over to WA. Like I mentioned earlier, the only obstacle to an immediate call-up, I think, would be his understanding of the West Coast game plan. But even then, I saw him fit into a number of really good linkage plays in the WAFL team quite seamlessly, and he was really the key cog in some of those drive-by overlap handballs that broke lines and pushed the ball forward. So I'm not even sure that that's going to hold him back as much as I would have guessed if you asked me 2 days ago. Second on the list is, as always, Clay Hall, and he's just week in, week out at the top of that list of players that are banging the door down for a spot in the AFL side. He's definitely got some competition now with McCarthy and Chesser back in the side, but unlike this week, he won't be coming off a week out of the system because he was travelling emergency in Adelaide. He actually didn't get to play for either side at all last week, and I do maintain that any time that he does get that call up, he's going to come in and he's going to have an impact. At number 3, I think the third most likely to get the AFL call-up is now Rhett Bazzo. I've been saying for a few weeks that he has the conditioning now and the ability to step in as a key back anytime that he's needed. And I think that after his performance today, that there's probably been consistent enough form to properly be asking that question of, can I push my way into the side rather? Other than that, a bit of an outside dark horse for me would be Campbell Chesser. The guy's missed so much footy that you would surely think he needs to at least get a couple of games under his belt in the WAFL first. But he did play so well today that it wouldn't surprise me if he comes in sooner rather than later, although I don't expect that would be next week. But anyway, that's all for tonight's episode of WAFL Watch. As always, thank you for tuning in. And if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing to ensure you never miss either of my weekly West Coast WAFL or AFL reviews. And I'll hopefully see you guys all again for my AFL review after a big upset against Geelong tomorrow at home. And until then,